Hi, Shira. Just letting you know we're waiting for the few stragglers to join us.
Thanks, Christine. Okay, looking forward to hearing you.
While we wait, I'm going to start my presentation. Okay, it's 4 minutes past 12, so I'll start with our recap. So in previous sessions, Lizelle and Shira took us through, covered the in basics of communication literacy, focusing on workplace communication, interaction with students, interpersonal communication, and so on. And this session will take us a bit away from that to think more about communication from a design perspective. And throughout this presentation, I will be asking some questions. You can either open your mic and tell me your answers or put it in the chat room. For now, I'm going to turn off my camera so that we can save a bit of bandwidth, since I know sometimes the Wits Wi-Fi can struggle a bit. So we're going to start off with what is design? And it is design with a big D, so the design discipline. And I'm going to give you 2 minutes to type out your answer or open your mic to. Lizelle, I like your answer. Hard work. Hi. We had a few more people join us. So today we're going to look at communication from a design perspective, and I want you to try and answer the question about what is design. You can type it into the chat room, open your mic to give the answer. So I found the best visual storytelling. That's actually really interesting. But yeah, so I found the best explanation of how to answer the question by a article by Prof. Norman. Um, he compared it to a fork in the road and that there's essentially two pathways to design. He explained that design began as a craft which was focused on creating beautiful objects. Today it has evolved immensely to a mode of thinking with discipline-specific ways of doing and has become an evidence-based practice. That doesn't mean that design as a craft is no longer relevant, it's just a different pathway with the same name. This is a more philosophical take on what design is, and more importantly, it brings us to the two main questions that most designers are faced with every day. Design versus design strategy explains is essentially a balance of what we do. So design as a craft is about figuring out the what of how of making and doing. This refers to the best practice methods of, for example, making content, of knowing how to use various methods of delivering said content, and so on. Design strategy is the why, outlining your goal, your target audience, knowing when to use a specific type of method of delivering types of content, or more specifically, when you shouldn't do something. The best way to really understand this is to look at examples. So I'm going to have three questions for you. And this is based on some of the types of content we see often used at Wits. And the best way to learn when you should use a specific type of content is also to look at when you shouldn't use it. You would consider the different types of content available and essentially look at the best one by looking at your why, the rather than the how. Not that the how and the what isn't important, but we'll get to that in a bit. So, in essence, all of these types of content aims to communicate something to your student. We can answer the questions in the chat room, or you can open your mic to answer it and go with the quick answer. I'll show you some examples in a picture, and we're going to do them one by one. And now the first question was when to use an infographic or when to use a presentation.
Christine, just repeat the instructions, please.
Okay, so when should you use an infographic or when would you use a presentation? So, and again, it's in a case of when shouldn't you use it? If I want to give you a quick answer, and Chantal actually just gave um the most of the a really good answer. It is an infographic is short and concise info, a taster. But yeah, and again, a presentation has a lot more information. It has multiple slides. And Sue is also right. An infographic is a standalone message, whereas a presentation is usually a tool that you use to help you when you actually talk to people. Not that it either can't be used in other ways as well. So I'm going to move on to my answer. And infographics and presentations is a way to share visual content. And Chantal mentioned earlier, but in the chat, infographics is one image, which are visual representations of data or concepts designed to quickly convey ideas and also to clearly convey it quickly. So the most commonly used infographics that we see is actually graphs, maps, scales, and so on. So while we often see them in journal articles, these are actually infographics as well. PowerPoint presentations deliver information in a structured format. They consist of slides containing text and various multimedia elements, so sound, video as well. So now we're going to move on to my question of, again, when you shouldn't use one. And I specifically chose this example as this is something that is often seen as used by lecturers to turn into an activity. So lecturers would and facilitators and subject that we have would ask students to make an infographic or to make a presentation. And sometimes they use the words interchangeably, but they are actually different. So we're going to move on to the next question, and it's on the screen now. When to use a text document or an Ulwazi text page. So this is, for example, what an Ulwazi text page is. It's just a basic HTML page. And then by a text document, I specifically refer to PDFs that we expect that can either be chapters or something we make for our students that they can download. You'll have another minute to give your answer. And it has been a minute. Would anyone like to open their mic to try and answer this question? I'll move on for now. Essentially, Ulwazi text pages and a PDF document with text is a way to share, again, a body of text. And Canvas and text pages and a PDF has some overlap. Both can include hyperlinks, images. The way we structure them are similar with headings, and we can add navigation. Anything you can do on a website, you can actually also do in a Canvas page with HTML coding. A bit trickier, but it is possible. The difference is that like Arshad said, we usually provide PDF documents for content that we want to provide that the students can use offline, whereas Ulwazi text pages has to be viewed online in the Canvas app or on a browser. And it can also contain multimedia elements like embedded videos and interactive content. Now, the interesting bit about these two types of content is about accessibility. On one hand, a PDF document is somewhat accessible since students can easily download it and it doesn't take a lot of data. That is one aspect of accessibility. Another thing is PDFs are horrendous to make accessible for assistive technologies. A basic Ulwazi text page is accessible with the tools built into the system. There's that button at the bottom of the Ulwazi when you edit a Ulwazi text page that essentially checks your accessibility, and if it's good, then any type of assistive technologies will be able to navigate that page, read it out loud, um, and so on. Did you guys learn something new here? Is there any other ways that you use PDF documents or an HTML Ulwazi text page? We are very quiet today. Okay, for now I'll move on to the next one, which is essentially about multimedia content. So when should you use a video? And I'd like to thank Lizelle for this lovely screenshot from the Nursing System Science course. And then there are some really good podcasts on the Wits website, such as the Professional Learning Conversations, the one from the Wits School of Governments, and Wits Impact for Good. So when would you use a video? And now, when would you use a podcast? Chantel, that's actually pretty interesting. So you would use podcasts when you have more time, when students should spend more time on it, and videos for shorter times, like a teaser. I'm going to move on for now, but feel free to still add your answers into the chat room. So again, this is a way to share multimedia content. Video is used when you have, like Lizelle just mentioned, visual content in addition to audio. For example, voiceover PowerPoints, those are videos with visual content. Videos of yourself giving lectures, a video introduction. Podcasts are when you only record audio and essentially you can do other things while listening to it. Now, the question about when you should use either is usually very contextual and depends on your goal. So a welcome introduction gives a more personable feel to the program and is practical because it can be used across multiple courses. We do find that making long lecture videos when you don't add any visual content is not very practical. Video is data intensive and is also very time consuming to make. The podcast is less data intensive on the hand of the students and is in most cases easier to make and in some cases more practical. Since students know what they can either read something, make notes while doing it, listening to it. And the way Chantal uses it is actually really practical and it works. Would you like to share what you do? I'm a bit curious to hear about it.
Thank you. Usually I use a video just to introduce the topic, and like you had infographics, so usually I'm talking to a model. So I'd put up the model in a video presentation and then talk through it, and then find a good WHO or UDCF podcast. And that's more for the student to engage with the content, because I find my students don't really like reading.
Yeah. And again, that really fits well with the why that we had earlier with design strategy. You know your students and you know that they don't like reading, so you provided an alternative mode of communication. Now, one caveat about videos and podcasts is that video quality is less important than audio quality. This is just a tip from a designer. If you have bad audio quality, a lot of your students will not want to engage with that material at all. People are more likely to forgive bad visuals than they are compared to bad sound, which is pretty interesting, and something that I learned from a interview with a director that worked to make the National Geographic movies. And with that, we're going to move on to the next bit, where we talk about what is communication design. So communication design is about blending design and information to see how media connects with people. It focuses on crafting the right message and look, while also finding new ways to reach your audience. Because of the similar skills involved, graphic design and communication design are often used interchangeably, but it is actually different skill sets. Graphic design would be the small circle and is very similar to visual communication design. But communication design is a lot broader. It covers not only what we see, but also what we hear, say, touch, and even smell. It also considers how we deliver the message effectively across different media channels. In this presentation, we will continue more on visual communication principles, but I wanted to mention it since this is an emerging discipline that has a lot more to offer than what we spoke about today. So design principles. And design principles are essentially the bread and butter of designers. We use these principles to create visually appealing and effective designs that communicate our intended message. We usually focus on clarity and user experience. And before we dive into the specifics, I'm going to share a key insight with you. When design is done right, it often goes unnoticed. Good design is so seamlessly integrated into your life that you barely realize it's there. It just works, it blends into the background. But when design misses the mark, it stands out and grabs attention for the wrong reasons. So learning about design principles is a way that you can learn to identify what makes design good and to recognize mistakes when you make them. So we're going to focus on layout, color, and typography. Now, these aren't all of the principles that exist in visual communication design. I just focus on these because they're some of the most visual ones. And it's ones that really shows why they matter is it's very easy to notice when these are missing. So we're going to focus first on layout. And well, without layout, your content doesn't have structure and it looks like a mess. Layout is also important to hierarchy, which we had underneath typography, but it's about letting you know what you should look at first and what is more important and what is types of content are have similar importance. So this slide is an example of a layout where we have a heading, we have 3 subtitles, and then we have a body of text with the design principles underneath each of those sections. So you can tell that layout, color, and typography are equally important in this presentation. So next we're going to look at what happens when you don't have color or use too many colors. When you have no color, you have nothing. Contrast is what makes things visible. The strongest contrast you see is between black and white, and it's also the easiest to read. On the other hand, too much color also equals no contrast. It creates confusion, it makes it difficult to distinguish between elements, and it's also can be painful to read. The last one is about typography. So that would be, again, hierarchy, line spacing, and letter spacing. And this is an example of what something would look like without typography. So while layout is how you structure to indicate hierarchy and categories, typography is also how we indicate hierarchy, so what to read first. And that would be design principles and then our subtitles. And that was just a slide about my structure. It is also the typography is also the part that includes the spacing between characters and lines. So line spacing is, I'm just going to get the laser pointer. So this would be when you see your document. This is one line spacing. This is about 1.5 line of spacing. And I think this was 3 points or 3 line spacing. And this is the automatic settings in PowerPoint. And it's not that none of these are useful, it's just this one is the easiest to read most often. Letter spacing, on the other hand, is also called kerning. And it's also something that can be used to give interesting effects, and also one where you can make the most invisible, or not invisible, but some of the mistakes we often see in posters and so forth is due to kerning. I added this example, but this is about fonts. In typography, choosing the right font is also really important. People are often warned away from these fonts, but it isn't that these are bad fonts. Comic Sans, for example, is one of the most dyslexia-friendly fonts available. The warning for these fonts is that these fonts have negative connotations. Comic Sans is one of the most hated fonts and one of the most famous for that reason. Because of that reason, it's also easier for us to just say, don't use the font, and to use fonts like Aptos, the new Microsoft font, Times New Roman, Lotto, Calibri, and Arial. I actually like Aptos the most because it is also more dyslexia friendly than Calibri or Arial, for example. So yeah, it isn't that Comic Sans doesn't have its place. It's just in a higher education setting, if you give a document with Comic Sans, it again has a negative connotation, and a lot of students may think bad things about it. It's not that the stereotype it is a stereotype, but it is pretty interesting to look at the history of the fonts, for example. The next part is, again, how easy it is to make a mistake. And I show this with letter spacing that I showed in the earlier slide, but this shows how the meaning of a sentence can change if you miss it. Now, a lot of the examples online are, let's just say, rather lewd. It took actually a bit of time to find an example that wasn't about certain parts of anatomy and the human body. And again, this shows you how you can get caught up in making simple mistakes that completely change of what you give. Now, one of the most effective ways to create quick and good designs are to start with templates as your base. Design tools like Canva, Pictochart, PowerPoint are powerful design software and come with a variety of templates. The key is knowing how to modify them to meet your needs and knowing if the template that you have will communicate the right message that you are trying to communicate. So the next set of principles is actually moving away from visual communication to accessibility design principles. So I talked about it a bit earlier while talking about our examples, but I wanted to cover it in a bit more depth. Accessibility refers to when websites and other type of examples are designed in a way that all people, including people with disabilities, can navigate, use, and understand. Now, these specific accessibility design principles are made specifically for web content by the World Wide Web Consortium. The short acronym is W3C, and it is the pour principles. So when I say pour, I mean like pour a pitcher of water, not pour as in, yeah. Sorry, that was just me pronouncing it badly. So information and user interface components the perceivable is about the user interface components that need to be presented in ways that people can perceive. So that means people need to be able to see, hear, or otherwise sense the information being presented. For example, if you have a podcast, you can add a script for students with hearing disabilities. And it also means that students that like to read while listening can do that as well. So it isn't only for students with disabilities. When you do something like this, it ends up helping all of the students involved as well. Operable refers to the way users interact with the interface, and the biggest way that web design usually considers this is, can you operate whatever content you've given the students with a keyboard? Canvas in this way is very accessible in that sense because it doesn't let you make anything that students can't operate usually, and it warns you when that content isn't accessible. For example, the hotspot question in new quizzes can only be navigated with a mouse. Students can't navigate it with a keyboard, so it's one of the types of content that isn't fully accessible. The next one is about understandable, and this is about the flow of information. So student users need to be able to grasp the content and how to use the interface. If it's too complex or too confusing, they can't understand it. And then the last one is about robust. So the content must be robust enough to be interpreted reliably using a wide variety of user agents, including assistive technologies. For us, it means whatever type of content we use, can it work in the browser, Chrome? Can it work on other types of browsers that Canvas recommends? And so on. So I would really recommend, if you ever have time, to read the World Wide Web Consortium accessibility principles, because they also include stories of people with disabilities and how they use different technologies to access content. And it's very eye-opening to look at it. The last tool, and we have Mina that mentioned it earlier, and it's about visual storytelling. So storytelling is both science and an art. Our brains are wired for them, and it is one of the most effective ways to communicate content to people in ways that they want to hear. This book is an example of beautiful visual design and a guide with practical advice for creating various types of content. I'm actually going to show you this book for a sec. just to show you what I mean. So let me just switch over to the ebook. Let me know, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So it's interesting because of the way they structure the text with the visuals. You'll notice that they don't have a lot of text on their pages, and the most important parts of it is made bigger in various ways. They have lots of photos and graphics, and they have a lot of white space in the background. So when you look at this is a book that I really want to go and read because it looks nice. And it has really good content on how to do various types of, how to write stories and how to make videos, for example, and take photos to communicate your story. I'm going to stop this one here and go back to my presentation. Just need to go to the right slide. Just let me know, can you see the slide on final tips?
Yes.
Cool. And these are my 5 final tips. So remember the why. Is what you're doing truly going to reach your goal? Is it going to resonate with your target audience? Remember the what and the how. Is what you're doing truly best practice? Are you following the best practice guidelines, the design principles, the accessible design principles that we spoke about earlier? Then my third part tip is that effective is more important than pretty. If your design doesn't meet your goal, it's not solving any problems, it's not meeting, and it's not working. So I recommend that you test your design by showing it to colleagues. It is very easy to miss something, for example, kerning. Then pretty helps. People are more likely to engage with something that looks pretty and is easy to navigate. And then last is don't be afraid to ask for help. I have some resources available. Um, I'll copy this into the chat room for you. So these are the links to resources that I use often. The first one is the Principles of Graphic Design. It's a course online available for free. It contains web pages and video content, so you can choose which option you prefer. You can also, for certain types of content, ask the instructional design support by the CLTD and check out their professional learning opportunities. Then we have the World Wide Web Consortium's website. Then lastly, I have the link for the World Health Organization storybook that I spoke to earlier. Thank you all for listening today. And do we have any final comments, questions? Anything you would like us to cover in future sessions that you would love that I spoke about? Chantel.
Yes, thank you very much, Christine. I'm in the process of actually redesigning our course content. Do we write to you guys to invite you to help us, or how does this? I'm new to Wits. I don't know what the process is. At what stage do we invite you in? Conceptualizing? Do you help with that?
So you can email me about it and I'll see, then I'll let you know. But for the CLTD resources, It is the instruction. You would email them via there's an email on their website that you can email for certain for their works to learn about their workshops and about their other resources and training that they have available.
Okay.
I forgot the email from the top of my head.
Okay, no, that's fine. I'll drop you an email. Thank you very much. This was very insightful and very timeless for me. Thank you.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Sue, more about maybe making podcasts. I'll look into that for you. Thank you for letting me know. Also, Chantel, Sal just mentioned this in the chat, but you can also email the CHSE via the education.health@wits.ac.za. I completely blanked on the email as well.
Yeah, some marketing. So from Chantel, it might be good for us to have an initial discussion and see as to how we can support and what assistance do you need, where you are in the process, and then we can direct you to where to ask for help and finding resources to get your course done.
Thank you, Lizelle. And with that, I'm going to end the session for today. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon, everybody.
Just before everybody goes, next week we will have a Viva Roach who will be completing our communication literacy sessions with an interesting take on the final part on different perspectives around and voices in communication related to communication literacy. So looking forward to see you all next week. Thank you. And thank you, Christine. Very interesting. Things that we don't think about, but we need to consider in our design of our lessons.